Good afternoon, good morning, and good evening, everyone, and welcome to today's Modern Sales Pros session on sales enablement, how to do it, how to scale it, sponsored by our friends at Brainshark. Really excited to have Julie Greenfield back here on an MSP panel. Julie is not only an amazing practitioner of sales enablement, she is one of long tenured and expert members of Modern Sales Pros, and she's passionate about our community and as a part of our diversity, equality, and inclusion action committee. She's been a very awesome member and contributor in a lot of different ways. Julie, thank you so much for being here. We do have a little bit of a tradition, as you may remember. Any new hobbies or skills or tricks that you've picked up since the start of the coronavirus pandemic?
So, and thank you for that warm welcome, Rich. Like it is great to be here. I love talking with the group and really sharing ideas and thoughts and, hearing from everybody. So really looking forward to today. New hobbies is not new-ish. I guess luckily we started it before the pandemic, which was a plant-based lifestyle. So my cooking skills have been improved tremendously. So I think I try to think of it more as a hobby. So it's more fun than just like having to cook dinner, coming up with some new and creative dishes. Pinterest is definitely my friend.
All right.
Just trying to change things up a bit.
What's the dish that you're most like? What's your go-to now? So like we're the MSP team is going over to Julie's for dinner. What's our vegan dinner going to be that night?
Oh my gosh! Wow,
Putting you right on the spot. Hard hitting questions right out of the gate.
No, that's okay. Well, so I'm in South Florida, so it depends on the weather, which is usually warm. So there's some really good comfort food ones that we've done. Like chickpea pot pie, which is fun, take on chicken pot pie, but use chickpeas. But we've really gotten into the crispy tofu or like a peanut Thai lettuce wrap, so don't miss the chicken that we would have used before and really, stepping up the tofu game in our household for sure.
That sounds delicious. We'll have to get together once we're all in and able to be in the same place. And this is great. And so Julie, she's going to help us out with our vegan recipes. And if we get to it, maybe we'll talk a little bit about sales enablement.
Sure.
But as I said, really excited to have Julie here today. For those of you just joining us, today's event hosted by the team at Modern Sales Pros. For those of you who maybe aren't familiar, Modern Sales Pros is the world's largest community for revenue leaders. So those are folks that are in sales management, sales and revenue operations, sales enablement, sales development, and the related supporting disciplines. Our community, of which Julie is one of the many awesome members that we have, our community exists to help our members answer the questions they'd otherwise struggle to solve on their own. One of the great parts about it is we really try to put together content programs that meet you where you are and answer some awesome questions like, hey, how do I get started with sales enablement, to concepts that are super complex and gnarly and technical, like how do I build a lead routing system in my Salesforce CRM? Try to cover everything in between, and whether we do it through a virtual experience like what we have today, or through our robust online forum, you do have an opportunity to get great perspective. And the community itself is about 20,000 members. And when you ask questions of the community, you're not just getting perspective from one or two of these organizations. We've got about 6,000 different companies of all different sizes, scales, and go-to-market strategies to help you get some perspective from across the board. For those of you who aren't members, you'll be invited to join afterwards. We'd certainly encourage you to do so. It's free, and you get to have even better conversations with members like Julie. But with that, today's programming really wouldn't be possible without the sponsorship of the team at Brainshark. I'm going to hand it off to Julie to say a few words, both about Brainshark and how she got involved there, and also what she's been up to. Julie?
Thanks so much, Rich. And it is our pleasure to be here, be a sponsor, and talk about sales enablement. As the Sales Enablement and Readiness Director with Brainshark, I work with our sales leaders, our reps, and many throughout the company to identify areas of opportunity and to formulate a plan to enhance skills, improve our processes, as well as the buying experience for our customers. And lucky for me, I'm able to leverage our own Brainshark solution to accomplish that through scorecards, content creation, learning, and our coaching platforms. So it's really a great position to be at. And I've had that learning and development background throughout my cycle, changed and started in IT, tech, and training, which was kind of funny. I love this. I taught college professors how to use email, create web pages. I'm showing my age a little bit, and effectively surf the web, which before Google came around, which was kind of fun, and just kind of transformed. Worked with sales teams, supported sales team, and landed, really supporting sales enablement. And so been doing a lot of training, education, development, and really a passion of mine is that people development and really, promoting from within and sharing best practices and ideas, and why I love MSP and the community of MSP so much.
And we're excited to have the experience and perspective that you bring here. And to set the stage just a little bit on this, for those of you that are here, what will be really, really helpful is when we think about this agenda, think about this through the lens of what you're doing at your organization today, the questions that you have. Today, Julie and I are going to talk through some of the basics to really get sales enablement, to get the discipline up and running, and to make it very effective for your organization. I think there's a lot of different directions that this conversation can go. Julie and I should say, have a lot that we can talk about here, but really do take this as the opportunity to learn from somebody who's been in the discipline really from almost the beginning. And I think if you can teach college professors anything, if you've ever tried to teach college professors anything, to call them set in their ways is an understatement. So this is somebody who knows what they're doing. So do take advantage of that. But just one housekeeping note, as I said before, really take advantage of this time to learn from Julie and to ask the questions that you have and maybe how this applies to your organization. You're going to do that through the question and answer panel that we have. You can upvote questions in there. You can add additional comments. If somebody asks a great question and maybe Julie wants to follow up afterwards with a great podcast or blog post, that's going to be helpful for all of us. And then the second piece, before some eager beaver asks it, recording will be made available. Takes about 24 hours for us to process after the fact, but you should have that in your inbox by about Friday morning at the latest. But with that, Julie, let's jump into this. And today is a great session because we really get to talk about a discipline that I think is on the rise. It follows, the revenue operations that we've seen. We've seen sales ops evolve from Salesforce reporting into really this strategic business differentiator. And I'm excited to have Julie on because she really does think about this discipline in where it's going to be in 5 or 10 years. But I mean, let's talk about where we get started. Like, how do I even begin? How should I be thinking about sales or revenue enablement, Julie?
Great, thanks. And it's interesting. And one thing, I'm sure we have people from all over, right? Whether you're with a startup, whether you have an enterprise org, and even, maybe you're a solo sales enabler, as we lovingly call it, or you have a team, building a team, and maybe you have a mature team, but you're looking at, okay, 2020 threw us a lot. And what are we going to do in 2021? And regardless of the crazy year we've had, we always should be planning at this time of year, right? Like, whether it's in sales enablement operations or whatever. So it's a real great opportunity. And I think that what 2020 has done is given us some of that leeway to take a step back and go, you know what, we need to plan from the beginning, just like we're brand new, whether we're brand new or not in the role. And starting with an enablement charter. And I say sales revenue enablement, as you alluded to. I have to chuckle and laugh because I just have that mindset and have for years and years before it was cool. And there was a term called revenue enablement. Anyone that is talking to your customers, customer success, support, whomever, you need to be thinking about, are we all on the same message? Are we all saying the same message? So when you start to build out this charter, and it's going to vary by your organization, but think about it from that lens, is like, what is that experience that we want our customers to feel, our buyers, right? how are we going to give them that awesome stellar experience, right? So we take the time to look at your charter and really plan out, okay, here's our role, because sales enablement, you can ask 10 different sales enablement practitioners of varying levels, and they're all going to tell you they do something different. When I did my intro, I talked about the partnership that I have with the sales managers. Okay, a sales enablement professional might just be stuck, I hate to say that, sorry, that was a slip, with onboarding, right? I just have to do onboarding, or I just have to do, product launch, or okay, it's different. Take a step back. What are the guidelines? What are the parameters? And those should be driven, absolutely. Start with your company initiatives and goals. What's the company doing? Now, how does our role end? Is it revenue? Is it across customer success, and sales, as well as others that are field facing, or is it just sales? All right, here's who we are. Here's what we're going to do. Here's how it ties to the company initiatives. Anyone who's ever listened to any of my webinars, objectives, outcomes, metrics, right? We'll talk more about the metrics piece, but you've got to document this, and you have to communicate it throughout your org and get that executive leadership commitment.
I think this is a great point, Julie. And I think a lot of folks coming in here at varying degrees of maturity, but one of the questions we see just time and time again in modern sales pros, I know you get asked, but who should own it? Who should own this, right? Who's the right person? Or are there multiple?
Perfect question. And it segues into this idea of building out your plan, right? What are the initiatives that are going on? So traditionally or historically across our, what I've been a part of, as well as what we see in our customer base, is that it usually sits within a revenue operations. If you have a chief revenue officer who is owning, customer success, and now we're even seeing customer success marketing and sales, right? So again, it varies. It could just be customer success and sales, and marketing is still separate, but you're going to see it under that venue. And you might have like a VP or SVP of sales ops and initiatives, let's say, and then they have enablement. You might have your solution consulting or sales engineers, whatever you want to call your demo people, right? Under them, that kind of thing, right? Like everybody, I don't know, I keep seeing the most creative titles these days. I'm like, I want to come up with a fun creative title, Chief growth is the big one now, that we're seeing, but you see it in there. Interesting enough, just yesterday, I had a rep tell me that the sales enablement position moved. And I went, oh, well, where did it move, right? Because I'm very curious about this, into product management. And I said, okay, did they say why, or do they know? I know. So they said no. But then I said, okay, based on my experience, right, and the background that I have, I would typically expect to see that if the company initiative is a product launch, or they're expanding, or they're shifting. So we had this kind of conversation about it. And he took a step back and he said, I think you're onto something, because they're going from what we would call, right, on-prem to a cloud SaaS model, right? So huge shift and lift and shift and initiative. And they want to make sure for them, it's going to be all about the solution. So they shifted it over there. We'll see what happens. But yeah.
I think there's a couple great points that Julie makes here, and I want to just reiterate. One of the things that we've heard time and time again, how do I build more pipeline? It always comes back to talking to your customers, especially since the start of the pandemic. And I love Julie's point of like, anybody who touches a customer of yours, anybody who touches a potential customer of yours is in need of, can be enabled and can be set up better for success. One other question here, Julie. This is another one, right? We talked a little bit about who should own it. When is the right time to start to think about sales enablement? I know you've got a lot on this, but when's the right time to start to think about it?
So this is a total biased opinion, right? I would say immediately, but there is truth and data and things to back up. And when you start thinking about building teams that are interacting with your buyers, right? Who whether it's sales, again, customer success, service support. How are we going to onboard these people? What is the messaging? What's our sales methodology? What kind of value selling or whatever that we're, putting out there? The reason you want to do it beforehand, right? Or as soon as you can really start to, is so that let's say it's a person, if you're, smaller startup, right? You're setting the foundation. And whether it's Harvard Business Review or some of the other reports, there are studies out there, right, about building employee engagement and this culture. And when you're all in the same message and you're able to have someone that owns it, right? If you have managers that are trying to onboard people or whatever, they're worried about the number, they're worried about this opportunity, you're trying to close business fast. Okay, they're not going to be worried about taking the step back. What are the processes? Because it's not just about training people. It's not just about training them how to sell. It's not just training about the product. It's about understanding what are the processes we have in place. What are the barriers to their success, right? How do we set them up for success? What does all of that look like? And it may seem scary and that we have to have some formal, like, oh my gosh, this is crazy. It's too rigid. It's going to take too long. It has to take thought, but it doesn't have to be so rigid. It should absolutely be agile, and it is not built with the same mindset that you see formal learning, and total respect for my friends in L&D, right? And that mindset. I've worked with a lot of instructional designers. One of the challenges I have seen is that more traditional learning, like you would expect a professor or that teacher type thing, where it's going to take me 3 to 6 months. Well, if you're in the software business, 3 to 6 months, your software has already changed, right? The world has already changed. So how do you be agile? How do you build this out? And when you set the foundation from the beginning, then it sets you up for success. Because if you're measuring it later on down the line, which we'll talk about, right? It's too late. You can't make the differences that you need to make.
And I think for those of you on the call who are maybe aghast, you just heard Julie say like, hey, it's a higher sales enablement, and think about maybe not higher sales enablement, but have a plan for it, right? Plan. There is extensive research on this. I think the most commonly quoted data point is like the replacement cost of a sales rep. So you bring somebody in, they don't get set up for success, you have to change that person out, is in the mid-market about 70% of their salary.
Right.
There are other studies that look at that if you fail at a class or two of sales rep hiring, you set your operating plan for your business back by a year or more. So to put some data behind Julie's point, it's not just that she's a sales enablement person saying, hey, yeah, of course you should hire sales enablement first. There is a lot of data on this. And I want to jump in a little bit more to the meat of looking at the talent that you have in your organization and trying to figure out where to start, because there's an infinite number of things to do, but really we're going to do it. We're going to get started. How do I start to look at the talent I have and build maybe different plans or enablement programs for them?
Right. Perfect. And, when I start thinking about it, and this really goes to that point, right, of when should you start, which is looking at the competencies. Okay. So, yes, HR can help you and work if you're, big enough that you have an HR department, right, already, if you're that startup, but you're working with them, you're partnering with the management to say, okay, these are the roles, these are the expectations, what are the competencies, what's the skills, what's the knowledge that they need, okay, where management and HR will probably help you build out they need to know how to prospect. They need to know how to, do discovery calls, and they need to know how to close. And okay, we all know that. But what are the specific details behind it? How are we going to train them? And then really to build or not those skills within. Okay, so when we talk about it from the sales enablement perspective, oftentimes you're going to see, just like hiring managers from that top rep, you're going to see that same kind of going on in an organization. And, it wasn't much unlike my journey, right? Like I came into onboarding because we didn't have an enablement team, right? In the support area I fell in. I was onboarding the new AEs that came, and my boss was like, that's not our job. That's our boss's job. Why are you doing it? And I'm like, we have to work with them every day. And I want to train them to be respectful of us in the right way, right? Like I was a little OCD, right? I want to train them the right way, but I loved it. And I enjoyed sharing and having that knowledge share. There's risk and reward, right? In this mindset of building from within. In some organizations, it goes back to culture, right? The culture is, it's fine, it's great. That person's seen as a subject matter expert. Okay, not a problem. They can move into that role. You have to take a step and look at your plan and say, okay, what are we going to solve for? And do they have those skills? And okay, is their cultural fit in our organization strong enough that we're going to help them with those skills? You're going to have to be helping and coaching these people as well. But one of the risks that you really need to watch out for, and it varies by organization. And when I think about this, I really think of the real large enterprise. We're talking $1 million opportunities. So let's say you take somebody that was not an AE, that wasn't selling those 2-3 year sales cycle, multi-million-dollar deals, and now they're training the people that need to sell those multi-million-dollar 2-3 year sales cycle. I have seen where the sales team and the managers, they respect that person for some areas, but then they kind of do this, right? Which is like, you haven't walked in my shoes. You don't know what it's like. You haven't tried to sell to the customer, ... Doesn't matter what you've done in the past if you hadn't walked in their specific shoes. So culture plays a big fit. It depends on your organization. It depends on the leadership buy-in, right? And whether that works or not. But there's pluses and minuses that you really should consider, and which outweigh which direction you want to go in.
Well, and I think that's one of those things where it's like, how do you keep focus in that world, right? How do you work with the frontline managers and the VPs to go, look, Julie's going to make us great at maybe it's discovery, or maybe it's overcoming this particular objection that's particularly technical. How do you get that collaboration and focus on these are the competencies that we're gonna really hone that team on?
So really important, and we kind of touched on it, and we didn't go as deep in the planning, which is the change management, right? You absolutely, when you build your plan, communicating it out, having the discussion, meeting with your executive leaders. And when I say executive leaders, I'm talking about across the organization. We're not talking about just in the revenue or sales or whatever org you're reporting into. We're talking cross-functionally, because then everyone is aligned, because you've tied it back to the company initiatives that the CEO and the executive team have set, right? Like you're tying it back into there. So you're having that kind of conversation. And, by doing so, then you can help go back to the plan. Okay, now in a year, like we've had, you have to be very agile and be able to pivot, but you still go back to the plan. And I'll kind of use a current situation, where people have identified, or they see something going on, at Brainshark, and they're like, hey, and then I said, okay, well, it's Q4, right? And I don't care where I've been in an organization. In Q4, what are we doing? We're finishing out our quarter. We're planning for our kickoff, right? And we've done plenty of webinars over on kickoff events and what it takes to do that. So now it's when we need to narrow the focus and say, what is it that we need to put in front of our reps to help them be successful until the end of the year? And then what are we planning for them to be successful starting January? Anything else is noise. And I think one of our biggest roles in enablement is quieting the noise of the sales team, right? I talk about this all the time. It's like, we need to quiet the noise, because product's going to come in and marketing's going to come in and this department's going to come in, and they all want to be in front of the sales team. And even at kickoff, they all want to be in front of the sales team. And you're like, okay, let's go back. What are we focused on? What are we trying to accomplish? Okay, how are we going to measure it? Yes, it fits in the box. It doesn't fit in the box. Okay. And sometimes, you have an executive that you have to just go, all right, and move ahead. I know I'm a realist. It happens, but we try to focus and steer away from that as much as possible.
the focus is critical, and I think that also it keeps you sane, right? Because I'd imagine there's probably more work to do for enablement than there is time in the day, and people even in the organization. And so the other point that I want to add to what Julie is saying here is really that focusing on what's the most important, what's the things that are going to line up with what the company's bread and butter is going to be over the next quarter or 2 quarters.
Yeah, absolutely. There's a couple, before we move on, I do want to touch on a couple of questions that we saw come in. Thank you to those that, as you registered, put some questions in, because we are in a different situation, right? With this is how we're having to interview people, right? And how do we know we've got the right fit? So Zoom or whatever tool you use is only going to go so far. So really think outside the box and leverage the resources that are out there. Have they done a webinar? Is there a recording somewhere that you can find, right? A podcast, YouTube, whatever the case is. Use social media to foster the conversation. I sure hope if someone goes out to my LinkedIn or my Twitter account or even Instagram, that's where you'll see the vegan food comes in, and some pet stuff, right? It shouldn't look so different from the person you're seeing right here. It shouldn't be like, holy cow, I did not see that coming, right? You want to make sure there's synergy there. So use that. And then the other thing I would strongly encourage is get perspective, right? You're working across an organization, and that sales enablement person has to be very fluent in being able to work with marketing, work with product management, as well as leadership. And so have people from those parts of the org do the interviews. You're going to get different perspectives, and you need to listen to the perspectives, right? You need to be able to listen and see. And just as important as those skills are, is that cultural fit. I cannot emphasize that enough right now, more than ever, because everything is this virtual world, and you have to be able to fit within the organization and help people. Empathy has been a huge theme this year, and it's going to continue for the foreseeable future. At least that's my hope.
I think that those are, when do we need less empathy in the revenue organization? I think it comes up, and we were talking about it before, we'll talk about it now, we'll talk about it forever. There's been a lot that we've talked about here that's great in terms of how to set it up, but I think the questions that always come about this, we saw it in registration. Cool, show me the metrics, show me the money. So how can organizations start to think about the metrics that actually matter to justify investment and continued investment in sales enablement?
Absolutely. And it would not be a Julie webinar without me talking about cracking the sales management code. Read that book, I don't even know how many years ago. Our leadership team was reading it. The sales leadership team, the executive leadership team read the book, because when it's like we were tracking everything. And read the book. If you're tracking everything, you're not tracking anything. And a lot of what was being tracked were those typical quota lagging indicators, which I, prefaced earlier. It's too late, right? You can't do anything about it. If that's how you're tracking, like, okay, but what are you doing? You're not trying to solve that problem. And starting at the top again, right? No surprise, start at the top, get agreement about what metrics that we're talking about. And things that because everyone's like, oh, but what do you track, or what do you see with your customers? Is it really, and it depends on your business, it depends on the role. So if I have an ADR, maybe I'm tracking how many meetings that they're qualified meetings that they're booking, right, for my AEs. Then I want to know, okay, did my AE hold? Did that meeting actually hold, right? Okay, what pipeline has been created? So it's all those activities that lead to the closed one and the quota down the road. But those are the metrics that we're looking at. So that's okay. And you're like, okay, Julie, that's great. That's across the sales org, but we're talking sales enablement. Okay, looking at your plan, maybe it's onboarding. Okay, so how is my onboarding class doing? All right, are they completing it? in what's the time frame, have we set it up a weekly, 2 weeks, three, hopefully you have a 30, 60, 90-day program for them that you've worked out. And so you're tracking completion, you're tracking successful completion, maybe you've set your criteria 80% or what have you. But now looking at that information, how does it tie into what we just talked about with the metrics? How is that onboarding from my ADR leading to their first meeting booked, right, with my with the AEs? That's what we're talking about. You have to have that correlation and put it all together. And there's lots of different software because everybody's always talking about it. To know, besides looking at it from did they do it, we want to know, can they do it? Is it impactful? Are they having great conversations? Are they truly ready when we talk about it? And we have partnerships, lots of different ways to measure that as well. And that's really what you should be looking at and thinking through versus just our old friend, the quota.
There's a lot there to unpack, and there's a few points I want to just make sure that we highlight, because they're great points. If you're focused on just did they close the deal, did they win the business, in 99% of cases, that's a lagging indicator. That's a result of effective negotiation, which is a result of effective discovery, which is a result of effective cold prospecting, which is a result of effective time management. So you can really pull as far back as you want to. Julie, other than, I think closed one is easy to pick on, are there any other metrics that when you go into an organization, you're just like, it's a vanity metric. It makes us feel good to see, but maybe isn't super, super valuable? Putting you on the spot with this one, I know.
No, I might not make friends. Gosh, you're really like, okay, people do not blow up my social media on this one. Leads. I'm going to talk about, when I really think about the top of the funnel, right? People, and it could be you held a webinar, you posted, what you went to an event and you had people come by the booth. Back in the day, remember? Oh, okay, sorry.
I remember when we used to be able to do these things in person. Don't. We don't have drinks. We don't have cocktails right now, Julie. You can't do that to me.
I know. And so, we put all these leads in, right? I talked to all these people. Okay. When I look at some of the top of the funnel, I poke holes in it. And unless it is very specific and deliberate, right? So there are times when absolutely you're looking at those leads in there and they are already qualified, versus it's just, whatever. I dropped my business card by because I wanted to win the cool, whatever it was you were raffling off that day. So I think that's one you also have to kind of to look for. Mm-hmm.
I think it also makes sense. I could see why in a past life, like, maybe a decade ago, leads would be really interesting. Now, I mean, it's everybody, so many different, ZoomInfo is one, but there's many sources where you can get a ton of information about everybody. So a lead as a name is, I think that's I don't think that's unpopular, Jill. I think that's very, I think that if folks really think about that one, they'll be like, oh yeah, no, that totally makes sense. Names are pretty easy to come by.
Yeah. I think, another one while you were talking popped in my head, because you know me, right? Like all of a sudden my wheels start spinning. And when you're measuring activity, right? And we joke about, we're not measuring activity for activity's sake, right? Okay, so what are the activities that we're doing that are leading to the results that we want? When, we're tracking just like emails, or dials, really be specific. And I look at, okay, what's the behavior to get to the end result? And again, you're looking at it by role. My ADR behavior, I expect they're going to be on the phones more, or whatever you're calling your development reps, right? But your development reps are going to be on the phones more potentially than some of your other roles. And you're expecting that they will have dials. And then, so maybe we're focused more on the calls connected versus just the dials. We do want to look at them and balance them out. But, you really have to take stock in, why are we measuring it? And are we measuring the right thing for the right behavior? Because I will tell you, I have been part of organizations that were measuring And I just sat back and I told my VP, I said, okay, you realize you're creating bad behaviors because what we're measuring. And I said, that's not helping build pipeline. That's not helping progress the deal through the sales cycle. It's not helping shorten the sales cycle. You're just checking a box.
I mean, that comes back to what we said at the beginning. You have to kind of know what you're trying to improve. I mean, it sounds really basic, but what's your plan? Okay, cool. We've got a pipe gen problem. There's a lot of different ways to fix that. And if you say, oh, we'll just measure the leads, maybe that's not the right way. Maybe you have a qualification problem. Maybe you have a discovery problem. There's so many different ways, and that's coming back to it. I really think that's an important part. Julie, there was a few actually questions that came in during registration. We've talked about this more as revenue enablement and a little bit less as sales enablement. And this question actually lines up with that expansion. Does any of this change if you're enabling a partner organization? I know, right?
I love
this person didn't specify what they meant by partner, but does any of this change if we're thinking about like getting a partner org set up for success?
I love it because I did do partner enablement in my past, and a very matrixed organization, led the enablement team, if you will. No, none of them reported to me. I just, just led the process, and definitely have the mindset that they're an extension of you. This goes back to just like we said with revenue enablement. If I'm enabling my internal folks to say, this is our value messaging, this is how we want to work with customers, I'm also looking at our partners to do the same. Now, I put a pin in it because as part of my enablement with channel partners, I was very fortunate and honored to work with the Middle East, which a totally different culture. Okay, so we had to take a step back. And it's not just the Middle East in particular, but when you think, but it highlights this, which is partners are selling usually not only you, but your competitor. Isn't that fun? So how do I get them to sell my solution versus your solution, right? So it truly is this partnership, and knowing how to have the conversation with them, and you're presenting it not like you have to do this, which isn't going to work, which is, this is the language we're using. We're using this language because when we both are meeting, and this was a sell with model, so it could be different. So I wanted to make sure I clarify that when we both go in front of this customer or prospect, we sound the same. We don't sound like two different entities. It's not you're A and I'm B, and this looks really clunky, and who am I working with, right? So it really came out when I was working with our partners there, but the same holds true when I worked with our Latin American Caribbean partners as well. So really helping say, here's why. It's always Simon Sinek, my favorite, right? Here's the why. We need to help understand the why. This is why we're saying it. We're putting it forth in this way. One thing that the partners taught me, which again, humbled by their thirst for knowledge, they wanted the enablement. And if you're able to offer that to them, and some people do, like if you get, you give them certifications, and then you have marketing development funds and things like that, right? You could get really creative in your more, enterprise, or if you're just a more mature organization, or you have the resources to bear to do it. But there's some real incentives you can offer them. But absolutely, prefacing our scalability. So think about that too when we start talking about scalability, because why do I want to create a whole different program? Yes, you're going to have some internal language versus some external language, maybe on, pricing and how much you make and whatever that kind of thing is. But the core, it should be the same.
I think that's an interesting model too. If you look at, that little company called Mulesoft not too long ago, very big acquisition by Salesforce, but there was a very, very muscular partnership component to that, a very muscular partner enablement function. And they did a lot of the co-sell. And I think anyone that's ever been part of a co-sell process, buyer, the two organizations co-selling, it's a little bit like trying to ice skate uphill sometimes. It can feel really not great. And Julie, I think that point, and it's a good transition into how do we do this, right? We're never going to have a one-to-one relationship between sales enablement and AE. but how do we make this scalable so folks can, like yourself in sales enablement, can go have other things they're doing in life other than just, 24/7 sales enablement?
Oh yes, and I have lived those that life a lot. Woohoo, it's not fun. We need a balance. We definitely need work-life integration. So I have a computer science background, so it's always fun. And building out that channel partner in particular, I was like, if it's not scalable, sustainable, and repeatable, we're not doing it, right? When you're first starting, I'm not kidding you, right? And that was back then.
No.
When you're first starting off, yeah, maybe you're doing the one-to-one, right? But take a step back and think about that. How scalable and sustainable is that for you, right? This personal, I need to have my own time. I need to have my downtime. Um, again, what have we learned? People having to take care of family, having, children at home doing homeschool, right? You need to have the flexibility. You're not going to be able to do the things you need to do for your life if you can't do the scalability and sustainable and a repeatable process. So leverage the tools, right? First and foremost, leverage the tools that are out there. Wonderful tools, wonderful technology to be able to do this. When you're building out your programs and building out your plans, think about, okay, do the little litmus test. Okay, can I reuse this? How can I repurpose it? Does it work for just our internal audience, or does it work for my partners as well if we have that case? Okay, great. How can I use that same piece, right, for across my roles, account development, account managers, AEs, CSM? How can we do this? I work very closely with our CSM organization, and we're looking at, okay, how does this can we leverage this? I'm like, yeah, I did a training for the team and it's recorded. Absolutely, use that, and then let's follow up with a Q&A, right? Those kinds of ideas. Think about making sure that when you're doing sessions, you record them, that you're not doing these one-offs all the time. It takes a little more, it takes time to be deliberate. You have to kind of take that step back and look at it and say, okay, great, put a system in place, have the system, create it, look at how you can plug and play pieces. Peer-to-peer, I cannot emphasize the importance of peer-to-peer, right? This goes back to that credibility piece. And, if you're looking to hire from within, and that makes a lot of sense, but yet you have that struggle that we talked about with that multi-million-dollar, they've never sold it before. All right, so maybe we have a peer program. We call it Swim Buddies here, of course, playing on our Brainshark theme. So, partnering up let's say our mid-market with our enterprise rep, right? And what's really fun, okay, so I'm going to do a little age here, which is traditionally our enterprise rep's a little more seasoned, right? A little older. So maybe the technology changes when we talk about social selling and the tools like LinkedIn Sales Navigator and using Salesloft and those kinds of tools. Maybe they're not as comfortable with. Well, guess what? They're sharing their knowledge on discovery questions and negotiation and close and whatever downstream. And then that mid-market is upstream and saying, hey, yeah, here's how you build a cadence. This is what I do. Here's how I'm leveraging, Sales Navigator and creating lists and sharing the lists with the internal team, right? So yeah, peer-to-peer, huge fan, if you can't tell, because they're going to listen to each other more than they listen to you. It just, okay, if you don't know that, accept it now and be okay with it.
And I think that's also, that seems like it's a critical component of scaling as well, right? If you can
Absolutely.
if you can get the team learning from each other, as long as it's quality, right? I'm sure we don't want perpetuating bad habits, but if you've got somebody who's quality with Salesloft as an example, that's a great person to educate. Maybe you're more enterprise rep on it. I love that point.
You are, and I'm glad you said that, because there's a lot of thoughts out there on this. And just by the nature of who we are and what we do, and my thought process is a little more governance in that sales enablement world, a little oversight. That doesn't mean we're, like this, it becomes this monster of a check and balance. But if you're saying you want everybody on the same message and you're doing peer-to-peer learning or training or coaching or what have you, Yeah, everybody needs to be on the same message. You don't want to create those bad behaviors, that rep who's just out there doing their own thing. And because they're hitting the number, okay, we're going to use them as our example, but they're not following the new sales methodology you rolled out at kickoff. Okay, I absolutely advocate for having some oversight in that mindset.
I think that you want to have them training each other on the right things and the stuff that needs to be I think messaging is a great example, right? Like, if we do this, that's what we do. And if we talk about it this way for these reasons, maybe it's a compliance concern, you have to talk about it in this order. No need to innovate on that one, ladies and gentlemen. We can leave that to the enablement folks. Julie, one of the questions that we see a lot when we talk about the mechanics of, or the practicality of enablement, the actual coaching that goes on, how does sales enablement work with frontline, sales or sales development or customer success managers? What's that interplay typically look like?
So I'll go with the most successful ones, right? Is
yes.
a partnership. It's a partnership, yeah. Right? You're having maybe it's weekly, bi-weekly one-on-ones with that manager. You're part of their, whether, let's say they have daily stand-ups or maybe they have a weekly team meeting, you become ingrained in their organization, right? And you become that valuable resource, and people see that. And the reason you're doing that in sales enablement or in revenue enablement with the managers is building that trust, right? That, and this is what I say to the team. I said it this morning. I told it, in the stand up, which was, I see what's broke, right? We're triaging, we're looking at the data. Okay, I see what's broke, and it's my job to help fix it, right? To help set them up for success. It is with that mindset. So you're having that partnership with the manager so that they know you're not, and I've been part of times when sales leadership came in and was like, okay, enablement, basically, you're going to be big brother. Yeah, that backfired. Because they wanted us to report back up to what was going on. No, it doesn't work that way. There's no trust there, right? You lose all credibility. I mean, you might as well just fold the whole sales enablement team if that's what you want them to do. So it really truly becomes this partnership. And so you do have to have that discussion of who's doing the coaching. Okay, so back to the coaching piece. We are very fortunate in our organization. We very much pride ourselves in coaching. So we have what we call in our enablement team an embedded coach. So it is her role to be, talk about scalable, sustainable, and repeatable of a sales manager. Because if you think about it, a sales manager may be a 5, 6, 10 direct reports, right? How do they scale? So we use our embedded coach to help scale myself. The rest of us, there's 4 of us on our enablement team. So we are all available as coaches. I would absolutely advocate for a structure. Just like you have a sales methodology, you have a coaching methodology, right? Some sales methodologies, I'll use Sandler as an example. Sandler has a coaching methodology along with it, okay? We have worked with, a private equity, listen to me, oh my God, private consultant, right? And we use his methodology for coaching across the organization and along with our customer success team, right? So we're all having the same kinds of conversations across the org and with each other as peers, right? So that we're looking at, how do we help and grow our people? Mm-hmm.
That's a very important meta point that you made there on alignment on what coaching means and how to do it. And if you think of, and I always have massive respect and love for the first line managers in sales, they usually end up in that role. If somebody got fired and they were the top AE, like that's like a very common promo path. But what Julie was saying there, that point is powerful. Coach your coaches, but not just on, the thing, coach them on how to coach, because they may not even recognize that that's a core part of their job at 26 when their boss just got fired and they're taking over the team. It's a really, really, really important point that Julie made there. And I want to highlight that. We've got a little bit of time.
Well, I'm going to circle back on that real quick, which is we haven't talked about enabling managers. And you know what? You just absolutely, you have to enable the managers, and you have to think about that. So when we talked about in the beginning, when do you start? Think about it from that lens too. Not enough is spent on enabling the management team, especially the frontline management team.
Yeah.
And they have to be supported. They need to be successful. They need to understand what are the expectations, right? What's going on? How are we all marching? What's our true north? Some people might say, right? You have to be enabling them so that then they can enable their people, to your point, because oftentimes we see exactly what you said, right? Which is, that's how we get, our managers is, oh, hey, you were the top AE, great. But what were the tools for them to be successful? Who taught them how to be a people manager? And did we even consider whether they are a good people manager? And maybe it's the B or want to be. And maybe it's the,
right.
What we would say is the B player is the one that has more empathy, is able to coach, has all of those other things, and make them a much better manager.
No, I think there's probably a whole nother session we can have on setting your managers up for success. I think that's a great point. We've got Julie for just a few more minutes here. We're going to move to questions. I know I've been firing them at you kind of as we go. Live question coming in, kind of about what we were just talking about, coaching, enablement. If you're the only sales enabler, I love that. Actually, it sounds really good to say. If you're the only
sales enabler.
Solo sales enabler, your solo enabler, how do you balance the coaching aspect, like what we were just talking about, with some of the more programmatic aspects of the role?
That's where you absolutely need to leverage those frontline managers, right? And one of the things I truly hope for you is that you have a very good relationship with your leader and your leadership. You need to be able to tell them what's going on. You need to be able to share with them that here's what I'm focused on. And usually they're very data driven. So whatever, maybe you have a planning software. I've used Smartsheet, I've used Rike, I've used, other different type programs. I love Outlook now. I keep getting these like little things about, basically my usability, right? Or like, how scheduled I am for the week. It's really weird. Whatever it is, right? Put the data, put it in their terms, because typically those leaders are our direct data driven people. Okay, here's the data, here's how I'm spending my time, and put it back to them. Here are the priorities we've outlined. Here's how I'm spending my time. Okay, you only have a limited amount of time in the day. And I know I am absolutely the one that doesn't like to speak up and say, I can't do it. I don't have time. I need help. It's very hard to ask for help. Don't be afraid to ask for help. And I'm going to plug MSP, right? Use the resources in MSP if you're having trouble with those conversations, because that's what I appreciate about MSP. Search first, right? I'm one of those. Please search first. There's a lot out there before you just post it. Search first, but then post, ask for help. Yeah.
And I think just bring it back, and obviously thank you for the plug for MSP. But to come back to the beginning, right? The very first thing we talked about was plan, right? What's the remit for the role this quarter? What's the big thing the company is focused on this quarter or next quarter that they need to knock out of the park? And that I feel like would also help any solo enabler to not get distracted by all of the things they could enable the team on, and really just focusing on, this is what I'm going to knock out of the park. This is what I'm going to set the managers up to do. And everything else we'll get to if we get to it, but it's just not a focus.
Right.
Another Reg question that came in, and you touched on this a little bit, but when thinking about kind of scaling sales enablement as a function, the question was around, is there a global or a centralized model, or do you see enablement being a little bit more regional? And you hit on it a little bit with the partnership side too.
Yeah. I'm glad we brought it up, because it was one that I thought was that I saw come in, and I think is really important, because I do have very specific thoughts, imagine that, on it. Because again, what's been successful versus what isn't. So do your assessment. Where's your corporate office located? Okay. What, the next thing they did was like, okay, who owns what? Is it each region? Right? Do we have and thank goodness, most organizations today, regardless, have that single global, chief revenue, chief sales officer. Great. That helps build that global case, and global, but regional. So we'll talk about that versus if you only own North America and it's very siloed. So it does depend on your organization. So let's take that true global organization. I absolutely went to my boss, because we didn't have that, which was in region resources. This goes back to that cultural fit. It goes back to, it could be language. Like, think about it, it doesn't matter where, but English as a second language, if you're not speaking their language, you now just put another hurdle in front of them. And sales methodology is great, because we've been talking about that with a lot of our own customers who are launching, sales methodologies, starting at kickoff, or new ones, or revamping, whatever. Okay, how are you going to help them with this new language, this new terminology, when English is not their first language and you don't speak their first language, right? So really, we met and put the data in front of them to say, okay, here's what we need. We need a resource in Latin America for our Latin American Caribbean team that speaks, at least Spanish, maybe even Portuguese, because, we had Brazil as well. So look at that, because it's that cultural fit, right? That is their, community, and they were born in Latin America. And so there's going to be nuances. I pride myself on trying to understand cultures. I love it, but it's still not my culture, right? Same thing, even with EMEA and Asia Pac. So time zones, we didn't even talk about that. There's always the challenge of just spreading yourself thin over time zones. I have done it and been on Sunday night calls with my Australia team before. It's always so fun at 7-8 o'clock at night on the East Coast, right? But just the nuances of changing Z's to S's, which I used to have a lot of fun with the team on, and push back on the way that we even write language, because it matters. But then also looking at our customers who had a very different model to do business in those regions in EMEA and Asia Pac versus they did in the United States, or even in the US and Canada. So you really have to look at your model and see if you can, and it makes sense to support that regional. You might have a global head of enablement, which I would suggest, because you want to have continuity at the highest level. And then how do you regionalize, if you will, appropriately? Give that leeway to regionalize the programs, whether it's the sales methodology, because you're going to have some nuances there.
Oh, there's certainly differences per region, even if you look across the European Union. I mean, there's different languages, there's different standards of business, the cold calling is different legal, different levels of legality in different places, privacy. There's a lot there. Julie, we're at time.
Oh my goodness.
It went by really, really fast. Julie, I really appreciate you taking the time here. Just any key takeaway, one thing that you took away, and I'll share kind of my key takeaway from this as well. Just one nugget that we want folks to go home with here.
So the biggest thing is to take time, plan, consider the change management, right? Have your executive buy-in and communications. I mean, all of that falls into the change management. It really, really, truly makes a difference to your success, is taking the time to plan it out, writing down your objectives, outcomes, metrics. How is this going to be successful? And reach out to the community for help. We are all happy to help.
I think that's the only thing I would add into that, Julie. Obviously, great points, great session, is really understand the metrics that make stuff happen. And remember, it's really, everyone loves to ring the gong. They love to celebrate with sales when we close the big deal. But do think about what's happening that's getting the deal to that point, the demo, the proof of concept. What are those things? And then think about how you can leverage sales enablement to improve those things, which then have the knock-on effect of improving the close one business. It's always a privilege to get an MSP member and an MSP expert to come and share perspective with us. Julie, this was a lot of fun. I love chatting with you. I hope our audience took as much from it as I did. I also know that you're incredibly busy. So I really appreciate you taking an hour out of your day to share your perspective and help folks really get started and evolve their sales enablement discipline. On behalf of the entire community, Hannah and the team behind the scenes, all the folks who are here, thank you so much for that. Really appreciate you sharing everything with us, Julie.
You're welcome. It was my pleasure. Thanks.
Awesome. And stay safe, everyone. And Julie, can't wait to do this again soon. Take care, everybody.
Bye-bye.